CHAPTER X. Of the Giant Killer, or the Battle which all must fight, by Charlotte Maria Tucker. Recording in the public domain. Lynne Thompson. CHAPTER X. The Pleasure Excursion. On the succeeding day, which was the anniversary of the birth of Mrs. Roby, the children were permitted to make a picnic excursion to a thicket on Upland Hill, and as it lay at some distance from Dove's Nest, a conveyance was hired to carry the party thither. A small pony chaise was accordingly brought to the door, and into it the young people cheerfully hastened, provided with a basket of sandwiches, cakes, and biscuits, and the best fruit which Mr. Roby's garden could supply. It had been usual for Mrs. Roby to accompany her children in their annual expedition to Upland Wood, but her place in the small vehicle was now more than filled up by the addition of the two young Probyns, and she could not therefore join the party without depriving some one else of the treat. With many a word of advice and kind injunction, she suffered the children to depart without her. Aleck, who was exceedingly steady, and had been taught enough of driving to be trusted with the reins of such a very quiet pony as Dobbin, sat in front, with Constantine beside him, while the larger back seat was fully occupied by Adolphus, the two little girls, and the basket of provisions. Off they drove, a merry little band, and all went on well as heart could wish, as long as they remained within sight of Dove's Nest. But then Constantine, in his proud, domineering manner, insisted on driving the pony himself. "There is no fun," he cried, "in sitting idle in the carriage," and he attempted to seize the reins from the hand of Aleck. Aleck at first resisted. Words became high. He had been entrusted with the charge of driving. He would not give up his post to another. For aught that he knew, Constantine had never touched a rein before. "That's little that you know," angrily retorted young Probyn. "I've driven my father's two spanking greys, rather different from this wretched little pony." Aleck had never known Constantine guilty of an untruth, and therefore, though surprised, did not doubt his assertion. The fact was, that both Constantine and his brother had more than once been allowed to hold the reins, while the powdered coachman sat beside them on the box, watchful to prevent any mischief from ensuing from the indulgence granted to his young masters. Aleck now, sorely against his will, relinquished what was to him a great pleasure, to prevent the pleasure of the expedition from being marred by anything like a quarrel at the outset. His little act of self–denial seemed, however, at first to have small effect in preserving peace, for no sooner had Constantine gained the driver's seat than Adolphus, who was as ambitious of the place as his brother, and even more selfish in his disposition, began to urge his claims, and struggle to enforce them. "Let Con drive to the wood," said Aleck, turning round where he sat, and laying a firm hand upon the shoulder of Adolphus, who was in the act of clambering over from the back seat. "I will take care that you have the reins on your return, if you wish them." And, only half satisfied with this assurance, young Probyn fell back into his former place. But the incapacity of Constantine as driver was pretty soon evident to all the party. Aleck, seeing his ignorance, offered a few hints, but the proud boy disdained to take advice, and only further betrayed his want of skill. Dobbin, indeed, was the most quiet of ponies, and had his rein been a silken thread, held in the little hand of Laura, he might have proceeded very soberly in his own way, and landed them all safely at last. But Dobbin did not understand being beaten, and having his mouth pulled hard at the same time. He did not know whether he was intended to go forward or to go back, and probably not wishing a long drive with such a charioteer, he very obstinately decided upon the latter. Instead of proceeding to Upland Wood, he half turned the carriage round, and, amid the sound of Constantine's blows, Bertha's entreaties, Aleck's advice, and exclamations of alarm from little Laura, Dobbin fairly won the victory, for he backed the chaise into a ditch and overturned it. A spectator might have been disposed to laugh at the scene, as, Except a strain of the left shoulder, which Constantine received, and a few slight bruises to the other boys, none of the party were injured at all. They all scrambled out of the ditch as well as they could, Aleck and Adolphus laughing and joking on the funny appearance which they presented, but Constantine rising from the mud in a little pain and a very great passion. Bertha quieted the fears of her little sister, smoothed her own crushed bonnet, and turned with a smile to the boys, who were endeavouring to drag the carriage out of the ditch, while Dobbin, a little heated with his exertions, stood very patiently by. "Oh, but I say, this is no joking matter!" exclaimed Adolphus, stopping in the middle of a jest, when he saw the basket of provisions half covered with mud in the ditch. All the preparations for the picnic quite destroyed. Everyone looked grave at the sight, until the piteous expression of little Laura's face tickled the fancy of Aleck, and made him laugh in spite of the misfortune. "I vote that we go back for more," said Adolphus. "No!" exclaimed Constantine, in an angry and determined tone, for he had no wish to meet his tutor or Mrs. Roby at that moment. He felt that he had been playing a ridiculous part, and he could not bear to be laughed at. "We'll do very well till dinner–time," said Aleck. "There are plenty of blackberries in Upland Wood. We'll picnic upon them and contentment." By this time the boys had succeeded in dragging the little chaise out of the ditch, but so bedaubed and bespattered with mud, that Bertha and Laura felt hardly inclined to get into it. "We'd better walk home, perhaps," half–whispered the latter to her sister. "Nonsense! Get in, will you?" growled Constantine. "Pro, leave that basket alone. There's nothing there fit to be eaten, even by a glutton like you." "Glutton!" exclaimed Adolphus, angrily. "No one likes to see his dinner in a ditch. I think that it would have been better for you to have said nothing about the matter, as it was you who brought us into this pickle." "It was that brute of a pony," cried Constantine, savagely. "If I won't give it to him, where's the whip?" "In my hand," said Aleck, calmly but firmly, "where it shall remain for the present." Constantine looked ready to spring at him, but there was a quiet determination in him who held the whip, which showed that Aleck would now be as resolute in keeping his proper place as he had before been good–natured in yielding it. "Con, you shan't drive any more," cried Adolphus. "We've had enough of ditches for one day." The looks of the girls expressed much the same as Probyn's words. "I wouldn't drive such a mule," said Constantine, contemptuously. "Aleck is heartily welcome to make what he can of it. We shall never arrive at the wood." Aleck jumped up in front, Adolphus beside him, the latter never offering to drive, as, after what had occurred, he stood rather in awe of the pony. Constantine looked as if he were doubtful whether he would enter the chaise at all, and it would have been well for the pleasure of the party had he decided on not doing so, for he came in with the manners and in the temper of a bear, squeezed Bertha up into a corner, half–crushed Laura's little foot, and never opened his mouth but to say something provoking. "We shall have to fight with Giant Hate all the morning," thought poor Bertha. "The tree of forgiveness is very hard to climb, almost more so than the pit of selfishness. How I wish that there was some way quite to choke up the fount of anger in our hearts, so that it should never come bubbling up again." The little girl was in the position of one fighting and struggling against an enemy almost too strong for her, but she had broken the venomed darts. To the many bitter words of Constantine she returned not one. It by no means improved the temper of the boy to see how quietly Dobbin trotted on with his new driver. He scarcely needed a touch of the whip, and, in spite of what Constantine had foretold, they did arrive safely at the wood. This was a great relief to Bertha, for here the children separated at once. The Probyns went off in different directions to search for blackberries, which were abundant. Aleck, after tying up Dobbin, for whom Laura delighted to gather long handfuls of grass, mounted the hill to enjoy the fine view from the top. and Bertha, now feeling like a bird set free, began to look round for wild flowers. "Laura, pet, you must help me to gather some," she said, "to make a beautiful crown, as we did last year, to give to dearest mamma on her birthday." "Oh, yes!" cried Laura eagerly, and first giving Dobbin's rough coat a friendly pat, she ran off to assist her sister. "Look what beauties I have found," said Bertha. "We have no such wild flowers near us. Is it not fortunate that my own little basket was not crushed when the chaise was upset? I brought it on purpose for the flowers." "Ah, the poor basket in the ditch," laughed Laura. "I almost think that it would have been better for us if the empty basket had been crushed and the full basket saved. Pro would think so, I am sure of that." A happy time it was for the little girls, as they pursued their pleasant occupation, consulting together whether red, white, or blue flowers should have the principal place in the crown, and which was the prettiest, and imagining how pleased their dear mother would be when their present was placed before her. Their enjoyment was increased when Aleck returned to them, bringing blackberries which he had gathered for his sisters. He also plucked for them some wild roses, which were beyond their reach, to add to their floral treasures. He had scarcely left them, in order to try a new path in the wood, when a far less agreeable visitor, Constantine, made his appearance. It was like a cloud coming over sunshine to the little girls when, bending over their basket, now almost filled with flowers, they heard his unwelcome step. "Oh, you've a basket, just what I want," said he. "There are lots of blackberries here. I'm going to gather a great many, but I've nothing to put them all into." "Oh, but my flowers, and they are for mamma. Pray, pray, leave it alone," cried poor Bertha, as his rude hand was laid on her basket. "Trumpery and trash!" exclaimed the petulant boy, making a scatter of the flowers as he raised it. "It's Bertha's basket, not yours," cried the indignant Laura. "If Aleck were here, you would not dare—" "Not dare!" he exclaimed, seizing her roughly by the shoulder. "You shall not hurt my little sister," cried Bertha, catching hold of his arm. Constantine shook her off with such violence that she fell and struck her head against a large stone, a blow which produced for some moments sharp pain, though not drawing any blood. Bertha began to cry. "Baby that you are, there's nothing to whine about," cried Constantine, who, between the mortifications of the drive, and his self–reproach for his own ungenerous and cowardly conduct, was now in extremely bad humour. Discontented with himself, he was so with all the world; for his pride, preventing him from owning the real regret which he felt, led him further and further into wrong. So he walked away now with a heart full of bitterness, much more to be pitied than the child to whom he had offered such unprovoked unkindness. "Bertie, darling Bertie, don't cry, please don't," exclaimed Laura, herself almost in tears. "I hope that it doesn't pain you much, does it, dear, dear Bertie?" "Not so much now, just at first, dear," replied Bertha, stooping to kiss her little sister fondly, and hastily wiping her own eyes. "Oh, what a bad, bad boy he is! I do dislike him with all my heart," cried Laura, clenching her little hand, and looking very indignantly after Constantine. "I wish I was strong enough to beat him." "Mamma would say that we showed ourselves much stronger in forgiving him. We must not be overcome by evil, dear Lautie. Remember what papa preached in his sermon." "If Con only said he was sorry." "We must make him feel sorry, whether he says that he is or not. You know in what way we can do that, how Fides threw down benefits on his foes." "Are you not angry with him, Bertie?" "Yes, I can't help being a little, but I am struggling against the anger. I felt much worse after he had hurt our dear Aleck. It is easier to forgive unkindness to oneself; and, after all, Con has seemed improved lately. Perhaps he has been trying to clamber out of the pit." "He has fallen down then to the bottom, to the very bottom," repeated Laura with emphasis. "Then how vexed he must feel, when he had got up a little way. We all know how hard it is to climb with Giant Selfishness at the top always trying to push us down again. But now, darling, help me to pick up these poor flowers. We cannot carry them so well as in the basket, but still we may tie them up in nosegays, and make a crown yet for mamma." A very sweet feeling came over the spirit of little Bertha. Perhaps Conscience was smiling upon her. Perhaps she was feeling the soft balm of the tree of forgiveness destroying the effects of the warm fount of anger. Bertha and Laura were busy collecting the scattered blossoms, when they were startled by Adolphus running suddenly towards them, excitement in his manner, alarm on his face. "Oh, come, come!" he breathlessly cried. "Poor fellow, I hear that he has knocked out his eye." Both the girls uttered an exclamation of horror. "Aleck! Is it Aleck?" cried Bertha, clasping her hands. "No, no, it is poor Con," said the panting boy. "He was gathering blackberries, and he pushed aside the bough of a tree, and it started back and struck him just on the eye. You never saw what a way he is in." Bertha and Laura, guided by Adolphus, quickly hastened to the spot, where they found Constantine stamping with pain, and holding to his eye a handkerchief stained with blood. His cry of anguish had brought Aleck, who happened to be near. Pity now quenched the last spark of anger in the breasts of the Robys. "Oh dear, oh dear, if he should be blinded!" exclaimed Laura. "Do you know if the eye itself is hurt?" said Bertha anxiously to her brother. "I do not know. He will let no one touch it. We had better put him into the chaise directly, and drive him to the doctor's. It is all on our way home." "Quick, quick! Let us go!" cried Bertha, and neglectful of flowers, basket, blackberries, and everything else, the children hurried into the chaise. Constantine doubled himself up in the back seat, rocking himself backwards and forwards, and sometimes uttering a moan. Bertha watched him with pitying eyes. Laura's murmur, "Poor Con, poor Con," were the only words uttered, while Aleck urged on Dobbin to such a pace as quite astonished Adolphus. Happily they found the doctor at home, who immediately examined the sufferer. Constantine could hardly endure to remove the handkerchief and expose his streaming eye to the light. It was too true that the blow had injured the eyeball itself, though the doctor hoped that the hurt was only of a temporary nature, and that if Constantine were kept for some time in a darkened room, and such remedies applied as were required, he might entirely recover the use of his eye, and not a trace of the accident remain. This was a comfort, but poor Constantine appeared as though he could receive no comfort. As again with bandaged eye he returned to the chaise, he looked so pale, so unhappy, in such pain, that it was with a manner almost as tender as it would have been towards Aleck, that Bertha made his seat as comfortable for him as she could. More trouble awaited the party on their return to Dove's Nest. Mr. Roby met them at the green door with the news that his wife had been suddenly called to attend her father, who had been taken dangerously ill with a fit. She had hurried away in the farmer's cart, for no other conveyance could at once be procured, to be in time for the next train starting for London. Many a fond message she had left for her children, as she departed with a very heavy heart, scarcely hoping to find her dear parent alive. "It is very, very difficult to feel that all things are for the best," said Aleck to Bertha, as they retired from his room after shutting the shutters for Constantine, and leaving him to try to get a little sleep after the suffering and fright which he had undergone. "Grandpapa may recover," suggested Bertha. "I trust that he will, but what a time we shall have of it while mamma is away! The doctor says that Con must be kept in the dark room and on low diet for a fortnight. How is he likely to stand that, he who can never bear for his will to be crossed for a moment? It seems as if troubles were coming so thick upon us." "And yet we may be sure that it is for the best," said Bertha, softly. "We must believe that now. Perhaps one day we may know it." Chapter 11